My mother sobbed, claiming bankruptcy canceled their anniversary trip, begging for $5,000. I transferred it immediately. A week later, I saw their luxury Paris vacation photos online, so I dismantled their financial lives entirely. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The bedroom was suffocatingly silent, save for the dreadful, rhythmic sound of my own congested breathing. I had been battling a severe case of pneumonia for nearly 10 days, a deep-seated infection that had drained every ounce of color from my face and every drop of energy from my muscles. My doctor had confined me to strict bed rest, warning me that pushing myself would land me in the hospital with a ventilator. At 35, I considered myself a healthy, independent woman, but this illness had reduced me to a fragile, shivering mess tangled in heavy duvet covers. My throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass, and even the simple act of lifting my head off the pillow sent a wave of agonizing dizziness crashing through my skull. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight against the bright spring sunlight, casting the room in a melancholic, shadowy twilight. I reached a trembling hand toward my nightstand, my fingers fumbling blindly until they brushed against the cold, smooth glass of my smartphone. I didn't have the energy to read a book or focus on a television show, so I had resorted to the mindless, numbing comfort of scrolling through social media. It was a terrible habit, but the quiet isolation of my apartment was beginning to drive me mad. I unlocked the screen, squinting against the sudden glare, and opened Facebook. My feed was the usual mundane compilation of targeted advertisements, distant acquaintances sharing recipes, and local news updates. I swiped down with a weak thumb, my eyes half closed, barely registering the images flashing past. And then I stopped. My thumb hovered motionless over the screen. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, sickly rhythm, suddenly hammered a frantic, terrified drumbeat against my ribs. Right at the top of my feed was a newly created photo album. It was posted by Kinsley, my 29-year-old sister, an aspiring lifestyle and travel influencer whose entire existence revolved around cultivating an aura of effortless wealth. The title of the album was written in her signature bubbly, emoji-laden style, Parisian Dreams with the Fam, celebrating 35 years of love. Airplane croissant clinking. A cold, paralyzing numbness began to spread outward from the center of my chest, creeping down my arms and settling heavily in my fingertips. I tapped the album, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone onto my chest. There were 42 photos. I stared at the very first one, my vision blurring at the edges. It was a wide, vibrant shot taken right in front of the Eiffel Tower. The sky behind it was a brilliant, flawless blue. Standing shoulder to shoulder, beaming with radiant, carefree joy, was my entire family. There was Arthur, my father, wearing a tailored navy blazer and a Panama hat, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in a decade. Next to him stood Mason, my 31-year-old brother, clad in an expensive designer sweater, holding up two fingers in a casual peace sign. Kinsley was in the foreground, taking the selfie, her flawless makeup catching the Parisian sunlight. And right in the center, looking like an aging movie star draped in a beige cashmere coat, was Barbara, my mother. I swiped to the next photo. It was a picture of the four of them seated at a white-clothed table in what looked like a Michelin-starred restaurant, holding crystal flutes of champagne up to the camera in a toast. The next photo showed Mason and Kinsley holding massive, glossy shopping bags from Chanel and Louis Vuitton. The next was a panoramic video of Barbara twirling in front of the Louvre, laughing hysterically as Arthur filmed her. My breath hitched, catching painfully in my inflamed lungs. A violent, agonizing coughing fit seized me, doubling me over in the bed. I gasped for air, tasting the metallic tang of copper in the back of my throat, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Exactly 8 days ago, Barbara had sat at my kitchen table, her face buried in her hands, weeping with such theatrical despair that she had nearly hyperventilated. She had told me, through breathless sobs, that an unexpected tax lien and a catastrophic medical bill had completely wiped out their savings. She told me their 35th anniversary trip, a modest domestic getaway, or so I had been told, was entirely canceled. She had begged me, her hands clutching mine with desperate strength, for a $5,000 emergency loan just to keep their mortgage from falling into default. I had transferred the money from my savings account instantly. I hadn't asked for proof. I hadn't hesitated. I had drained a significant portion of my own security to save her from ruin. Now, staring at the digital proof of their luxurious, transatlantic indulgence, a trip they had clearly been planning behind my back for months, a trip they had purposely excluded me from and then tricked me into funding, the reality of the situation crashed over me like a suffocating wave of ice water. The betrayal was worse than the illness slowly suffocating my lungs. I lay there for what felt like hours, the phone resting on my chest like a lead weight. The bright, smiling faces of my mother, father, sister, and brother burned into my retinas. The sheer audacity of it was entirely paralyzing. They hadn't just gone on a secret vacation, they had publicly flaunted it on a platform where they knew I would eventually see it. Or perhaps they didn't care. Perhaps my presence in their lives was so purely transactional that they didn't even consider the consequences of me discovering their lie. A terrible, hollow ache settled into my stomach. I pushed myself up into a seated position, fighting the dizzy spell that threatened to knock me back down. I reached for the glass of water on my nightstand, my hand trembling so badly that water sloshed over the rim and soaked into the bedsheets. I drank greedily, trying to soothe the raw, scratchy fire in my throat, but it did nothing to quench the burning anger igniting in my chest. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to know exactly how deep this delusion went. Without allowing myself time to second-guess the decision, I opened my contacts, tapped Barbara's name, and pressed the call button. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the long, drawn-out rings. Due to the international connection, there was a slight, hollow delay between each tone. On the fourth ring, the line clicked open. "Hello." Barbara's voice floated through the speaker. It was light, airy, and tinged with a breathless excitement she was clearly trying and failing to suppress. "Mom," I croaked. My voice sounded dreadful, hoarse, weak, and raspy from the pneumonia. I didn't have to fake my distress. "Oh, Mia, sweetheart." Her tone shifted instantly, adopting a practiced, sickly sweet cadence of motherly concern. "Oh, my poor darling, how are you feeling? Has the fever broken?" I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headboard. In the background of her audio, I could clearly hear the distinct, unmistakable sounds of a bustling European street. There was the clinking of porcelain cups on saucers, the low hum of traffic, and a woman's voice nearby saying something rapid and elegant in flawless French. I'm about the same," I lied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "It hurts to breathe. I'm just lying here in the dark." I paused, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably. "How are things with you, Mom? How are you and Dad holding up with the financial situation?" There was a split second of hesitation on her end. I imagined her sitting at a Parisian cafe, exchanging a panicked glance with Arthur over a plate of warm croissants. "Oh, it's just miserable, Mia," Barbara sighed, her voice dripping with artificial exhaustion. "We are just barely scraping by. Your father has been on the phone with the bank all morning trying to sort out this mess. We're just sitting here in the living room, eating canned soup, trying to figure out how we're going to pay the electricity bill next month." The lie was so smooth, so effortlessly delivered that it actually made me nauseous. "That sounds awful," I whispered. It really is," she agreed readily. "But we are so incredibly grateful for your help, Mia. That $5,000, it literally saved our home. We paid the mortgage arrearage right away. I don't know what we would do without our dependable, practical girl." Dependable, practical. Those were the words she always used to describe me. Never brilliant, never beautiful, never special. Those adjectives were strictly reserved for Kinsley and Mason. I was just the dependable workhorse. Suddenly, a loud, cheerful voice cut through the background on her end. "Mom, look at these macarons, they have gold flakes on them." It was Kinsley. Barbara fumbled with the phone, the audio muffling slightly as if she had clamped her hand over the microphone. Sorry, Mia, that was just. The television, I have the travel channel on. You know how I love to torture myself dreaming of places we can't afford to go. She let out a forced, brittle laugh. Anyway, I have to go. Your father needs me to look at some dreary paperwork. Get some rest, sweetie. I will. Bye, Mom, I said softly and hung up. I let the phone drop onto the bed. The silence of my bedroom returned, pressing in on me from all sides. The tears, which I had been fighting back since seeing the first photo, finally broke free. They ran hot and fast down my cheeks, soaking into the collar of my pajamas. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn her approval, trying to be the bedrock this family could rely on. I had sacrificed my own vacations, delayed my own purchases, and worked 80-hour weeks to ensure I always had a safety net, not just for me, but for them. And this was my reward: to be scammed, to be left sick and alone while they drank champagne across the world on my dime. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing the tears away. The profound sadness was slowly, steadily calcifying into something much harder, much sharper. A cold, clinical clarity began to wash over my feverish brain. Barbara was a master manipulator. She had spent a lifetime spinning webs of guilt and obligation, convincing Arthur to look the other way, convincing Kinsley and Mason they were entitled to the world, and convincing me that it was my duty to pay for it. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she had executed the perfect crime against her own daughter. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To truly understand the depth of Barbara's deception, one had to understand the architecture of our family dynamic. I was the eldest of 3, but I had never been treated as a child. From the moment I could walk and talk, I was the designated adult, the crisis manager, the fixer. Barbara had spent her youth as a moderately successful luxury real estate broker. She was a woman who was fiercely, obsessively dedicated to appearances. For Barbara, the perception of wealth was far more important than actual financial stability. She dressed impeccably, drove leased German sedans she could barely afford, and hosted lavish dinner parties that put the family into terrifying amounts of credit card debt. When she eventually lost her license, due to a minor, quickly hushed-up scandal involving misappropriated escrow funds, a detail the family was strictly forbidden from ever mentioning, she simply pivoted her career to managing the family image. Arthur, my father, was a private wealth accountant by trade, but at home he was a ghost. He was entirely passive, terrified of Barbara's volatile temper and manipulative weeping. He enabled her behavior out of pure self-preservation, burying himself in spreadsheets at the office while she ran the household finances into the ground. Then there were my siblings. Kinsley, the golden child, was beautiful, charismatic, and completely allergic to hard work. Barbara worshipped her, viewing Kinsley as an extension of her own vanished youth. When Kinsley decided she wanted to be a travel influencer, Barbara insisted that the family needed to support her dream. The family, in this context, meant me. I had paid for Kinsley's professional camera equipment, her initial lighting setup, and even funded her first 2 sponsored trips out of my own pocket, convinced by Barbara that it was an investment in her future. Mason was no better. At 31, he fancied himself a tech entrepreneur, despite never having written a line of code or successfully launched a single product. He bounced from one disastrous startup idea to the next, always needing seed money to get off the ground. When his investors, usually Arthur's gullible friends, came knocking for their money back, it was Barbara who swooped in to protect her precious boy, crying to me about how Mason's spirit would be broken if he faced bankruptcy. I was 35, an IT security architect and senior database administrator for a massive corporate firm. I was highly paid, highly competent, and highly isolated. Because I didn't have a husband or children of my own, Barbara operated under the assumption that my income was essentially community property. She was a predator cloaked in maternal warmth. Her primary weapon was an incredibly potent form of weaponized fragility. She knew exactly how to make her problems feel like catastrophic emergencies that only I could solve. The memory of her performance last week replayed in my mind with sickening clarity. She had shown up at my apartment unannounced, her makeup perfectly smudged to imply she had been crying for hours. She had sat in my kitchen, her shoulders shaking, refusing the tea I offered. "I didn't want to tell you, Mia," she had sobbed, her voice cracking with dramatic perfection. "I wanted to protect you from this, but your father, he made a terrible mistake, a bad investment, and now there's a tax lien. They're talking about foreclosure, Mia. We're going to lose the house. The anniversary trip is canceled, of course, but that doesn't even matter anymore. We just need to survive." She had looked so small, so broken. She had produced a piece of paper, a generic, printed letterhead from a collection agency that, in hindsight, looked incredibly suspicious. But I hadn't scrutinized it. I had looked at my mother's tear-stained face, felt a surge of panicked responsibility, and immediately opened my banking app. "5,000 will hold them off until Arthur's next commission," she had whispered, wiping her eyes. "I promise we will pay you back, Mia. I swear on my life." It was a masterclass in emotional extortion. She had targeted my deepest vulnerability, my desperate, pathetic need to be valued and loved by her, and exploited it flawlessly. As I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the fever began to break, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. They were in Paris. They were laughing, drinking, and celebrating their beautiful, perfect family, entirely unbothered by the fact that they had essentially stolen from me to do it. Barbara had orchestrated the entire thing, confident that her dependable daughter would just swallow the loss and ask no questions. She was right about one thing: I was dependable. I was methodical. As an IT architect, my entire career was built on designing impenetrable systems and, when necessary, finding the fatal flaws to tear them down. And as I reached for my laptop on the floor beside the bed, a dangerous, humorless smile finally touched my lips. The heavy, metallic chassis of my corporate laptop felt cool against my fever-flushed legs. I adjusted the pillows behind my back, fighting through the lingering ache in my chest as I booted up the machine. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark bedroom, casting sharp shadows against the walls. For years, I had been the family's unpaid IT department and financial administrator. When Arthur began to struggle with the transition to digital banking a decade ago, and Barbara repeatedly lost their paper statements, I had taken it upon myself to consolidate their entire financial lives. I had built a highly secure, encrypted portal on a private server. Through it, I managed their tax filings, monitored their checking and savings accounts, and, most crucially, acted as the digital administrator for the family's irrevocable property trust, a legal entity set up years ago by my late grandfather to protect their home. Because they were entirely technologically illiterate, I held the master keys. I was the designated trustee, legally bound to protect the assets from fraud. It was a responsibility I had taken seriously, but one I had always managed with a hands-off approach, only logging in when it was time to compile their taxes or when Barbara claimed another emergency. Now, my fingers flew across the keyboard with ruthless intent. I bypassed the standard login screen, accessing the administrative backend. The dual-factor authentication pinged my phone. I entered the 6-digit code. The dashboard loaded, displaying a comprehensive overview of Arthur and Barbara's financial ecosystem. My first target was the supposed tax lien. I navigated to the secure inbox where all federal and state correspondence was digitally routed. I set the search parameters for the last 12 months. The results populated instantly. The screen was starkly empty of any notifications from the IRS or the State Revenue Department. There were no warnings, no levies, no liens. The tear-stained document Barbara had waved in my face was a complete and utter fabrication, likely mocked up in a word processor. A cold, methodical calm washed over me. The feverish haze was gone, replaced by the precise, analytical mindset I used to dismantle security threats at work. I clicked into their primary checking account. The transaction history populated line by line. There, dated exactly 8 days ago, was my $5,000 transfer, labeled emergency relief. I followed the money. It had sat in their account for exactly 4 hours. Then it had been transferred out, not to a collection agency, not to a mortgage lender, but to a high-yield travel credit card. I opened the credit card statement. The chronological list of charges read like a luxury travel brochure. Air France, first-class upgrades, $3,200. Hotel Lemurus, Paris deposit, $4,500. Chanel, Avenue Montaigne, $6,400. El Arpege Restaurant, $1,200. The charges went on and on, page after page, accumulating to a staggering total of nearly $40,000 over a single week. But it wasn't just the sheer volume of the spending that caught my attention, it was the source of the funding. The credit cards were maxed out, yes, but Barbara had also tapped into a massive reserve of cash. I dug deeper, opening the folder containing the irrevocable property trust documents. My eyes scanned the recent activity log, and my breath caught in my throat. 3 weeks before her tearful performance in my kitchen, a home equity line of credit HELOC for $50,000 had been finalized against their house. I opened the digitized PDF of the loan agreement. I scrolled down to the signature line. There, rendered in a suspiciously smooth digital script, was Arthur's signature. Beside it was my own digital signature, authorizing the encumbrance on the trust. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had never signed this document. As the IT architect who built the system, I knew exactly how digital signatures were logged and verified. I pulled the IP access logs for the day the document was signed. The IP address matched my parents' suburban home. Barbara hadn't just lied to me. She hadn't just scammed me out of $5,000. She had committed federal wire fraud, forged my signature as the trustee, and forged her own husband's signature to leverage their home for Kinsley and Mason's Parisian shopping spree. This was the clever trap she had unknowingly walked right into. In her arrogance, she had utilized a system she didn't understand, leaving behind a flawless, time-stamped digital trail of her own crimes. And she had left the master controls entirely in my hands. I spent the next 4 hours systematically downloading every ledger, every forged document, and every transaction history onto an encrypted external hard drive. I compiled a meticulously organized dossier of her fraud. Then, utilizing my authority as the trustee and citing suspicious, fraudulent activity, I initiated a complete system-wide lockdown. I froze the credit cards. I locked the checking accounts. I revoked all user access permissions. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to trigger it. It took 4 days for the fallout to reach me. By Saturday morning, the pneumonia had finally begun to retreat. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of hot black tea, dressed in comfortable clothes rather than pajamas for the first time in 2 weeks. My laptop sat open before me, the screen dark but ready. At exactly 10:14 a.m., my phone buzzed on the granite countertop. The caller ID flashed Barbara's name. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the silence in my apartment to center my focus, and then I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice deliberately neutral. "Mia." Barbara's voice erupted through the speaker, tight, shrill, and vibrating with poorly concealed panic. "Oh, thank God you answered. Darling, we have a massive, massive emergency. The system is completely down. Your father's card was just declined at the grocery store, and when I tried to log into the portal you built for us, it said the accounts were frozen." She paused, taking a ragged, dramatic breath. "We think we've been hacked, Mia. Someone has stolen our identity. You need to log in right now and fix this. Unfreeze the accounts immediately, please." I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I stared out the window at the morning traffic. "I'm feeling much better, Mom. Thank you for asking," I said quietly. There was a sudden, jarring silence on the line. The frenetic energy of her panic hit a brick wall. "What, Mia, did you not hear me?" She snapped, the sweet facade slipping to reveal the sharp, impatient edge beneath. "This is not the time for pleasantries. We have no access to our money. We are victims of cybercrime. You have to unlock the portal." "I heard you, Mom. I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level, completely devoid of the deference she was accustomed to hearing from me. But you haven't been hacked. I locked the accounts. You, what? Her voice dropped an octave, the panic morphing instantly into furious indignation. What on earth gave you the right to do that? Unlock them immediately, Mia. I am not playing games. I am the legal trustee of the property trust and the administrator of the accounts, I stated, reciting the facts with icy precision. It is my fiduciary duty to freeze the assets when I detect fraudulent activity and massive, unauthorized withdrawals. Fraudulent activity. She sputtered, her voice rising in pitch again. What are you talking about? Your father and I have been sitting right here in this house, eating canned soup, trying to survive this tax lien. It was time to shatter the illusion. How was the weather in Paris, Mom? I asked. The silence that followed was so profound, so absolute that I thought the call had dropped. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized her meticulously constructed reality had just collapsed. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally stammered. Her voice lacked its usual theatrical flair. It was weak, Reedy. Are you feverish again, Mia? Are you hallucinating? I saw Kinsley's Facebook album, I said, my voice hardening into a blade. 42 photos, the Eiffel Tower, the champagne toasts at El Arpet. Mason and Kinsley holding thousands of dollars worth of Chanel bags. I saw the panoramic video of you twirling in front of the Louvre in a new cashmere coat. I paused, letting the weight of my words press down on her. You sat at my table, crying about losing the house, and begged me for $5,000 while you were actively packing your bags for a luxury European vacation. Barbara's reaction was instantaneous. Instead of apologizing, she pivoted violently to the offensive, lashing out with obvious, desperate lies. You don't understand. She shrieked defensively. That, Kinsley won a contest, an influencer sweepstakes. The whole trip was completely paid for by a sponsor. We didn't spend a single dime of our own money. We didn't tell you because you were so terribly ill, and we didn't want you to feel left out or jealous. A contest, I repeated flatly. Yes, a contest. She insisted, her voice growing louder, more erratic. How dare you invade our privacy and freeze our money over a misunderstanding? You are so incredibly selfish, Mia. After everything I have done for you, you spy on us and try to ruin your sister's moment of success. Did this influencer contest also require you to take out a $50,000 home equity line of credit on a house you don't legally control, Mom? I asked softly. Another crushing silence. I could hear her rapid, shallow breathing through the receiver. Did the contest sponsor ask you to forge my digital signature and Dad's signature on federal loan documents? I continued, the coldness in my voice absolute. Because I have the IP logs, Mom. I have the timestamp transfers. I know exactly where the money came from, and I know exactly where it went. You ungrateful little. She began to hiss, her voice trembling with raw, venomous rage. I didn't let her finish. I pressed the red button, cutting her off mid-insult. I set the phone face down on the granite counter. The first confrontation was over. The trap was locked. The immediate aftermath of the phone call was a flurry of chaotic, desperate digital activity. My laptop screen lit up with a rapid succession of automated email alerts. Alert, failed login attempt on Master Portal. Alert, password reset requested for Master Portal. Alert, multiple failed authentication attempts. IP address temporarily blocked. Barbara was panicking. Having lost control of the narrative, she was frantically trying to regain control of the system by brute forcing her way in. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her every keystroke was being logged, timestamped, and added to the already massive dossier of evidence I was building against her. I sat back, watching the alerts roll in, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The mother I had spent 35 years trying to please was effectively dead to me, replaced by a frantic, cornered fraudster attempting to cover her tracks. But I knew Barbara's playbook intimately. When direct intimidation failed, she would invariably deploy her ultimate shield, Arthur. She would twist the truth, play the victim, and send my father to clean up the mess and guilt me into compliance. I didn't have to wait long. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. It was Arthur. I answered immediately. "Hi, Dad." "Mia," Arthur's voice was heavy, rough with exhaustion and stress. He sounded older than his 60 years. "Mia, what is going on? Your mother is completely hysterical. She's locked herself in the master bedroom and she's crying so hard she can barely breathe. She says you've gone crazy, that you hacked into our bank accounts and locked us out, and that you're making wild accusations about Kinsley." He sighed, the sound of a deeply beaten man. "Please, sweetheart. I don't know what fight you two had, but you have to unlock the portal. We can't buy groceries. We can't put gas in the car. She's in a terrible state." This was the hardest part. Arthur was a passive, cowardly man who had enabled her abuse for decades, but he was also deeply manipulated. He lived in a carefully curated bubble of ignorance, preferring not to ask questions as long as the peace was kept. It was time to burst his bubble. "Dad," I said gently but firmly, "did you go to Paris last week?" There was a long, painful hesitation on his end. I heard him swallow hard. "Mia, look," he started, his tone shifting into defensive placation. "Your mother has been under an immense amount of pressure lately with the tax lien and the threat of foreclosure. When Kinsley's sponsor offered the free trip, Barbara thought it would be a good way to relieve the stress. We just needed a break, Mia. She didn't want to hurt your feelings by telling you while you were sick." My grip on the phone tightened. She had even managed to convince him of the contest lie. "There is no tax lien, Dad," I said, "and there was no threat of foreclosure." "What do you mean?" Arthur asked, his voice wavering with confusion. "I saw the letter from the collection agency, Mia. Barbara showed it to me." "It was a fake," I told him bluntly. "She printed it out to convince me to give her $5,000, money which she immediately transferred to her Chase Sapphire card to pay the deposit for the Hotel Lemurus." "Mia, no." "No, that's not right," Arthur stammered, the denial thick in his voice. He was struggling desperately with his loyalty to the reality he knew. "She told me she borrowed that money from you to pay the mortgage arrearage. She promised me she was handling it. She only meant well, Mia. She just wants to protect the family." "Open your email, Dad," I interrupted, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "What?" "I am sending you an email right now. Open it." I clicked send on the email I had prepared. It contained a secure link to a read-only folder on the server. Inside were 3 documents. I heard the faint ping of his tablet receiving the notification in the background. "Open the first document, Dad," I instructed. I heard him rustling around, the tapping of his finger on a glass screen. "Okay, it's a loan agreement, a HELOC." "Look at the amount," I said. $50,000. He whispered, the breath rushing out of his lungs. "Now look at the signatures." There was a long, excruciating silence. I could hear the exact moment his heart broke. I could hear the shallow, rapid breaths as he stared at his own forged signature and mine right beneath it. "I never signed this," he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "I never saw this document." "I know you didn't," I said. "She forged it. She took out a $50,000 loan against the family trust to pay for Paris, Chanel bags for Kinsley, and first-class tickets for Mason. But that's not all, Dad. Look at the second document." I heard him click. "That is the transaction history for your private retirement account over the last 5 years," I explained, maintaining a clinical, steady tone while he processed the devastation. "She has been systematically siphoning money from your 401k to pay off Kinsley's credit card debts and fund Mason's failed businesses. She's drained nearly $200,000, Dad." "Oh my God," Arthur choked out. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. The sound of a man realizing his entire life was a carefully orchestrated lie. "Oh my God, she said the market was just performing poorly. She told me not to worry." He was crying now, soft, broken sobs that echoed through the phone. "She has committed fraud, Dad," I said softly. "Against me and against you. The accounts are locked because I have a legal obligation as the trustee to secure the assets when crimes are being committed. Mia, he wept, what do we do? What do I do? You pack a bag, I told him, the master strategist now fully in control. You pack a bag and you come to my apartment, because tomorrow we are having a family meeting, and I am going to end this. The atmosphere in my apartment the following afternoon was suffocatingly tense, heavy with the impending collision of reality and decades of carefully constructed delusion. I sat at the head of my large dining table, my laptop open, a stack of 4 thick, perfectly bound manila folders resting on the polished oak surface in front of me. I wore a sharp, tailored blazer, my armor. The lingering cough from my pneumonia was the only physical sign of vulnerability I allowed myself, but my mind had never been sharper. Arthur sat to my immediate right. He looked entirely hollowed out, staring blankly at the grain of the wood, his hands trembling slightly where they rested on his knees. He had spent the night in my guest room, weeping until he had no tears left, grieving the death of the marriage he thought he had. At precisely 1:00 p.m., the buzzer to my apartment rang. I pressed the intercom to unlock the lobby doors, my pulse remaining remarkably steady. A few minutes later, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the hallway. I opened the door. Barbara stood there, flanked by Kinsley and Mason. They looked like a royal family stepping into the quarters of a rebellious peasant. Barbara was wearing her expensive new Parisian cashmere coat, her chin tilted up in a mask of furious indignation. Kinsley was busy tapping aggressively on her phone, looking profoundly annoyed by the inconvenience of being summoned. Mason simply looked bored, jingling the keys to his least luxury SUV in his pocket. Well, Barbara snapped, marching past me without so much as a greeting. I hope you are satisfied, Mia. We had to take an Uber here because our cards were declined at the gas station. This little power trip of yours ends today. You are going to log into that computer right now and restore our access. Sit down, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried a cold authority that made Mason pause his jingling. I will not sit down, Barbara hissed, her eyes darting to Arthur. Arthur, tell your daughter to stop this nonsense right now. I cannot believe you came here and entertained her hysterical delusions. Arthur did not look up. He didn't speak. He just sat there, a silent, damning presence. Barbara faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing her features, but she quickly masked it with outrage. She pulled out a chair opposite me and sat down stiffly. Mason and Kinsley, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, quietly took the remaining seats. I am missing a very important brand collaboration call for this, Mia, Kinsley complained, rolling her eyes and tossing her phone onto the table. So whatever this family meeting is about, can we make it fast? My credit card is frozen, and my photographer is threatening to cancel our shoot tomorrow if I don't pay his retainer. And my cloud server hosting is going to be suspended by midnight, Mason added, leaning back and crossing his arms. I need 50,000 transferred into the startup account by 5 o'clock, or my entire beta launch is ruined. I looked at my siblings. They were perfectly preserved specimens of entitlement, entirely insulated from the financial reality of their own existence. They had no idea the ground beneath them had already vanished. There will be no transfers today, Mason, I said smoothly. I slid one of the manila folders across the table to him. I slid the second to Kinsley, and the third directly in front of Barbara. I kept the master copy for myself. What is this? Kinsley asked, looking at the folder as if it were coated in poison. That is a complete forensic accounting of your lives, I replied. Open them. Mason flipped his open first. His eyes scanned the top page, his brow furrowing in confusion. Kinsley opened hers a moment later. Barbara simply stared at the cover of hers, her jaw clenched tight. Page 1, I directed, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The bank transfer from my personal savings account, dated exactly 2 weeks ago. $5,000. Given to Mom under the explicit, tearful pretense that a collection agency was foreclosing on your house. I paused, letting them process the numbers. Page 2, I continued. The credit card statement from Mom's Chase Sapphire account. you will see my $5,000 deposited. 4 hours later, you will see a withdrawal for $4,500 paid to the Hotel Lemurus in Paris. The remaining $500 went to Air France for first-class upgrades. Wait, what? Mason blinked, looking from the paper to Barbara. Mom, you told us the trip was paid for by Kinsley's influencer contest. Yes, Mom, Kinsley chimed in, suddenly looking very pale. You said the sponsor covered everything. What is this? Barbara's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She's lying. She fabricated these documents. She works in it. She knows how to fake a spreadsheet. Turn to page 4, I instructed, ignoring her entirely. They flipped the pages. I heard Kinsley gasp. That, I said, pointing to my own copy, is a legally binding home equity line of credit. $50,000 taken out against the family trust. The trust that I legally managed to protect the home. 50,000. Mason choked, his eyes wide with shock. You took out a loan on the house for Paris. Look at the signatures, I commanded. They looked. Kinsley's hand flew to her mouth. Mason stared at the digital script in absolute disbelief. Mom forged Dad's signature, I explained, the clinical precision of my tone slicing through the rising panic in the room. And then she forged my signature as the legal trustee. That is not just a lie, Mom. That is federal wire fraud. It is identity theft, and it is a felony. You little witch. Barbara suddenly shrieked, slamming her hands down on the table. She half rose from her chair, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The sweet, fragile mother act was completely dead. How dare you? I am your mother. Everything in that house belongs to me. I raised you. I clothed you. You owe me. I had every right to use that equity. You had no right. Arthur's voice suddenly cracked through the room like a whip. Everyone froze. Barbara whipped her head around to look at her husband. Arthur slowly lifted his head, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, hardened steel. The passive ghost was gone. Arthur. Barbara started, attempting to slip back into her practiced, pleading tone. Arthur, don't listen to her. She's just trying to tear our beautiful family apart. You tore it apart, Barbara, Arthur said, his voice trembling but remarkably firm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own set of papers. Mia showed me my retirement accounts yesterday. $200,000, Barbara. $200,000 missing. Drained to pay for Kinsley's ridiculous clothes and Mason's imaginary businesses. You stole our future. Dad, I didn't know. Kinsley started to cry, real, terrified tears streaming down her face. I swear I didn't know where the money was coming from. Neither did I, Mason added, shrinking back into his chair, looking at his mother with disgust. You told me you had an angel investor, Mom. You are all ungrateful. Barbara screamed, spinning around, cornered and frantic. I did everything for this family. I gave you the lifestyle you deserved. We needed to project success. You don't understand how the world works. I understand perfectly how the law works, I said calmly, closing my folder. The accounts remain frozen. Tomorrow morning, I am submitting this entire dossier to the bank's fraud investigation unit. I am legally required to report the forged signatures on the trust, or I become an accessory to your crimes. Barbara's eyes widened in sheer, breathless terror. You would send your own mother to prison. I am simply protecting the trust, as you demanded I do when you made me the trustee. I replied, feeling an immense, profound sense of peace settle over my shoulders. What the federal authorities do with the evidence of your fraud is entirely out of my hands. Arthur, Barbara pleaded, turning to my father, tears streaming down her face, reaching out to grab his arm. Arthur, please stop her. You have to stop her. Arthur stood up, slowly pulling his arm away from her grasp. He looked down at her, not with anger, but with absolute, final pity. I am filing for divorce on Monday, Barbara, Arthur said quietly, his voice echoing in the stunned silence of the room. And I will be cooperating fully with the bank's investigation regarding the forgery of my name. He turned to me, offering a sad, broken smile. Thank you, Mia, for opening my eyes. Barbara collapsed back into her chair, a long, mournful wail escaping her lips. The Golden children sat in stunned, terrified silence, realizing the bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed. The spell was broken. The trap had flawlessly snapped shut. The fallout was swift, devastating, and entirely absolute. Once the bank's fraud department received my meticulously compiled dossier, the machinery of justice moved with ruthless efficiency. I didn't have to lift another finger or utter another word in my defense. The digital footprints Barbara had left behind in her arrogant ignorance painted a complete, irrefutable picture of her guilt. Within weeks, federal investigators were formally involved. The sheer brazenness of forging the signature of a legal trustee on a federally backed loan document elevated the situation from a domestic dispute to a serious financial crime. The bank immediately called in the $50,000 HELOC, demanding full repayment. Because the funds had already been squandered in Paris, on hotel deposits, first-class flights, and designer handbags that depreciated the moment they left the boutique, there was no money to repay it. Arthur's divorce proceedings were surprisingly clean, mostly because Barbara had virtually nothing left to fight for. To satisfy the bank's demands and avoid an immediate prison sentence, she was forced into a devastating plea deal. She had to completely surrender her half of the equity in the family home. The house was sold within 2 months. I used my professional network to secure Arthur an excellent forensic accountant and a ruthless divorce attorney. With my help, he managed to salvage a small portion of his remaining retirement funds. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a comfortable, quiet apartment in a modest neighborhood, far away from the crushing pressure of keeping up appearances. For the first time in 35 years, Arthur looked peaceful. He began reading books again. He took up gardening on his small balcony. The heavy, anxious weight that had hunched his shoulders for decades completely vanished. Barbara's downfall was total. Forced to vacate the suburban mansion she had used as her stage, and with a felony fraud conviction permanently branding her record, she found herself entirely unemployable in any position that involved handling money or presenting a prestigious image. She moved into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. Without Arthur's income to drain and with her credit score completely annihilated, the luxury sedans were repossessed, the designer clothes were sold to consignment shops, and her carefully curated social circle immediately and brutally ostracized her. Her Golden children offered her no comfort. When the money vanished, so did their loyalty. Kinsley's influencer career imploded overnight. Without my forced subsidies and Barbara's stolen funds to pay for her professional photographers, trips, and bot-generated followers, her engagement plummeted. Faced with the reality of having to actually support herself, she was forced to take a job as a shift manager at a mid-tier retail clothing store in a local mall. She blocked Barbara's number, furious that her mother's stupidity had ruined her aesthetic. Mason's entrepreneurial delusions shattered just as violently. His cloud servers were shut down for non-payment, taking his imaginary beta launches with them. Unable to secure legitimate funding because he lacked an actual business model and completely cut off from the family trust, he moved into a shared basement apartment with 3 roommates and took a low-level data entry job to make rent. He, too, blamed Barbara for his failures, completely refusing to speak to her. As for me, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The pneumonia had long since cleared from my lungs, but the deeper sickness, the suffocating, desperate need for the approval of a woman who only viewed me as an ATM, was finally cured as well. 6 months after the final confrontation in my dining room, Arthur came over to my apartment for Sunday dinner. I had cooked a simple roast chicken with vegetables, filling the space with warm, comforting aromas. We sat at the same table where I had laid out the evidence of Barbara's crimes, but the atmosphere was entirely different. It was light. It was safe. "This is delicious, Mia," Arthur smiled, taking a sip of his wine. He looked genuinely happy, the lines of stress around his eyes noticeably softened. "I'm glad you like it, Dad," I replied, smiling back. He set his fork down, his expression turning thoughtful and profoundly sincere. He reached across the table and placed his hand gently over mine. "I never properly apologized to you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. For all those years, for letting her treat you that way, I was a coward, Mia. I let her take advantage of your goodness, your responsibility, because it was easier for me to hide. I am so deeply, truly sorry. I looked at my father, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, and felt the last, lingering knot of resentment in my chest untie itself. I forgive you, Dad, I told him, and I meant it. We were both manipulated, but we're free now. That's all that matters. He squeezed my hand, a tear slipping down his cheek, but it was a tear of relief, not sorrow. I looked around my quiet, peaceful apartment. My bank accounts were secure. My professional life was thriving. I was no longer the dependable workhorse for a family of parasites. I was simply Mia, living my own life entirely on my own terms. The trap had been necessary, the fallout had been brutal, but the justice was absolute. And as I poured my father another glass of wine, I knew I had finally won.